Hey Larry, I'm gonna be right back. 1 second. I'm gonna go grab. I'm gonna go grab a quick Pepsi. I'll be right back.
Good stuff. Hey, Christian.
Hey Larry, I'm just posting a quick message to the maintainers.
Hi, Arella. Hi, Yusuf.
Hey, Lawrence. Hello, everyone else.
Hello. Afternoon, Roger.
Hey, good morning, good evening, good day.
Any bucket?
Yeah. Everybody goes today.
So let's see, are we still waiting on Igor for this one? Looks like Igor has declined, so I think that might be everyone for this week.
Yeah, I think this is it. Would anyone like to volunteer to lead from the TSC? Or shall I do it?
I would request them not do it this week, just because I know I will not get the notes up in time.
I'll do it. That's no problem. Right. Okay. So we did not have a meeting 2 weeks ago. There is one thing that I would like to say actually from the meeting a month ago. 1 second. 1 month ago, I told them that I would clarify this in the next TSC meeting. I made a comment that Oracle.
You're sharing the wrong thing. Oh, are you just sharing that, PR? Or no?
Yeah, here we go. Right. Okay. I made a statement that Oracle was migrating everything to OpenTofu. This is not their official stance. I'm putting it on this video and then in the TSC meeting so everyone's happy. I added a small addendum to the notes. They did ask me to remove the note. I think we have public meetings and we should carry on and everything should be public. So I added a addendum to the notes afterwards. Apparently some managers got unhappy, so we shouldn't be making these comments. RL, it looks like you want the gossip after the call. Maybe we can talk about it after. All right, okay. So that's that for today. I will now talk about if you filed today's agenda. We didn't have any action items from the previous meeting. The previous meeting, there was a couple action items for me, actually. There was one to talk to the TSC about moving to the incubating status. I had a look at their checklist. We are not checking off a few things on that checklist. And I think we should work towards it, mainly around proving that our governance has matured over time. And there was another item. There was something about having a list of users and testimonies to hand, and we can start looking at that. So there's some things I wanted to discuss today. 1.11 timing, because we're 1.10.6 now, and it's been a while. 1.12, what that looks like, and some opinions on HashiConf and some of the features that they announced. I've picked out the 2 new features that Terraform is really pushed for. Does anyone have anything they'd like to discuss before we jump into these? Nope. Okay, 1.11 timing. I believe we are at a point where our big feature ephemeral is quite matured and has been tested. We've got a couple of small bugs here and there. We got a blog post out that's pushing people towards the nightlies. I really should go and pull some stats on how many people have downloaded those nightlies. But so far we've not really heard any issues. and I believe we're pretty feature complete. I think we've got a few small bugs and documentation, everything to get into place. So maybe Christian is the one to ask, but do we want to be looking at 1.11 beta in the next week or two, and then we go towards RC and final as and when?
I think so. The only piece of work that if memory serves, that is outstanding is that we were planning on adding the enabled field for modules. It's landed for resources, thanks to you. And I think his PR for modules is still open.
Okay.
So
So
I
we're
think
almost
maybe,
beta complete. Once that's done, we can push a beta.
yeah.
Cool. I don't know if I'm looking for TSC approval or anything on this one, really. I'm just wanted to talk about it openly. Does anyone have any reason to not do a 1.11 release?
I mean, is this the process for deciding whether or not we cut a minor version? Like we just say, like, is the TSC cool with it, or do we actually have criteria for assessing whether or not we're ready for another minor release?
We do have a milestone on the OpenTofu repo that has a list of all the items that we wanted to get in. So I'm going to bring that up super quick. Share this tab instead. Milestones. We have 1.11 milestones. So the maintainers usually like to just say that we'll do a beta when we are happy with the state of 1.11. The reason I'm raising it with the TSC is just I wanted to make sure that no one had features they were expecting in 1.11 that I didn't mention just now. So it's kind of like speak now or forever hold your peace before we go forward. So as Christian mentioned, the conditional enabled field is going in for modules. This is the same item. This is our release tracker. Ephemeral resources is mostly in, like I say, just cool bug fixes, and this is a documentation change we just discussed as maintainers. It's very easy to go and do.
There's one piece of ephemeral that we're waiting for user feedback on, but we've discussed that with Andre, and I think we're going to move that out of the RFC tracker and put that on slated for a future release once the community has given us some better feedback on what exactly they think that particular portion of that feature should entail. But it should not block the release of the feature.
Christian, I've got a very unfortunate name for English speakers. You said user feedback?
Yes.
Okay.
User feedback. Sorry.
It's much easier in the commercial world where we can say customers, right?
No, this is OpenTofu. We fight for the users.
You fight for the users or for Yusuf?
I'm a little hurt, Christian.
Depends on the day.
It's fine.
Okay, all right. Anyway, in the essence, in the idea of moving on, 1.11, no one seems to have spoken now, so you should all forever hold your peace. We can go and cut a 1.11 beta soon. That leads us into the conversation of what is our next big flagship feature for 1.12. We have a few different candidates. We have some ongoing work around a new engine, I'm going to say, to try and keep it simple. Martin Atkins has rewritten a lot of the execution engine, moving us away from a lot of the complicated graph executions. I believe after the conversation we just had before this, he's going to open an RFC about this, but we have a 60 to 70% complete proof of concept, I would say.
I think talking about the completion of that is hard to do at this point, given the number of open questions. I would not recommend saying complete. An idea of how complete it is.
I was going to say 80% complete, 80% to do. Standard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say 120% to do, just because of the size of it. But for a little bit more context, as part of the last hackathon, I did some experimentation with ripping apart how our execution model works, found some really cool stuff, bounced some ideas back and forth with Martin, and Martin then took that conversation and some ideas from talking about that code and turned it into this. So it's kind of been this, we've been bouncing ideas back and forth for I think 3, maybe 4 months now. And we've both computationally designed something remarkably similar. with different levels of abstraction. But that gives me a lot of confidence that we're building something that makes a lot of sense, that two people with very different sensibilities with the same understanding of the same problem came to very similar solutions, means that this is a huge win for OpenTofu. And there's a lot of benefits to why we're working the execution engine. If you want to read more about that, there is an RFC that is linked in that PR. It kind of detailing our general understanding of the problem, our frustrations with OpenTofu's current execution model, and a very rough sketch, which this is a little bit more, a very rough sketch of what we think we could do, and this is a first or second attempt at actually building that.
Paying off a lot of tech debt, but it's going to give it a lot of
Stupid amount of
velocity
tech
as a
debt.
result. So I think the current idea of approach, because this doesn't edit any of the existing code base, the current idea is, and this is early days, we were just discussing this half an hour ago, we merge this into the code base in main, and we have a flag where you can turn on the experimental engine mode, slow migration path across, not breaking anything as we go forward. Downside of that is that we will be maintaining two different sets of packages for a little while, but the advantages far outweigh the cost there. Roger.
Did discuss this some time back about how long we'd leave features experimental for. Would just come under that? Was it like, I can't remember if it was like.
Good question. So
I know there'll be exceptions to everything in terms of feedback, but
I think that is the thing that I was going to say. It all depends on feedback, and trying to gather that feedback is really interesting. I think we were joking earlier about 80% of the work, right? 80% of this work is going to be corner cases and edge cases. And what we really want to be doing is getting this in, asking people to test it with some modules and giving us the corner cases and edge cases and fixing them. That could be a one and done. This could be, it works. It could be a very long slog. And I think we should always be reevaluating over time. Cool. Yusuf?
Yeah, I was going to ask, maybe what you answered is like the full answer for this, but what's the strategy for encouraging experimentation with these experiments?
Yeah, so we don't have a huge amount of strategy around this, but what we have done recently, we've done with the ephemeral, we've just put out a blog post about ephemeral and push people to use the nightlies, and I think we should try and do this for this new approach too. Talk about this in blog posts. Maybe we should doing things from a social point of view, LinkedIn, etc., etc. I think we just need to ask, but we also need to accept the fact that most people who are running infrastructure as code are running it in production environments and aren't going to be wanting to test too much. So we should give them a reason to test. So we should be talking about how, hey, maybe you can go and plan against your existing environment, see how much faster it is, see if you hit any edge cases. Maybe some of the tacos companies can find a way to make sure we have experimental builds in there to allow people to test things. I don't think we have a plan, but I think there's a lot of different things that we can do.
Okay, if I can recommend a couple of things, one thing that's worked is collect a list of people. So in the Terrarun Discord, you can sign up for a role that says like you're open to testing new functionality before it's generally available. If you can just, I know Slack doesn't make that as easy. Maybe there's something we can do with CNCF to get a group or something, or just get a Google Sheet, like names, and specifically tell them like, hey, we just changed this thing about the engine. Can you please give it a shot and let us know? Getting tagged is a lot more effective than like reading a blog post somewhere. Two, I would highly recommend like having an English version of this, because like I just looked at this and I have no idea what this really does as an end user, and I imagine that no end user is going to know why they want to try this experiment unless they're like pretty pictures and like you know, an ELI5 version of this.
So this is mirroring the conversation we just had with the maintainers, where I spent the better part of a week or two digging through the code, Martin's comments, and talking with him and putting together a summary. And I think Martin and I are going to try and merge those together. What he is here, my summary, what we learned from feedback from the other maintainers, and put in an RFC that is hopefully a little bit more of a, it's a little bit more specific than the original RFC, which was revisiting OpenTofu's core architecture, but doesn't get as deep into the technical weeds as this. It's mostly this is what we're planning on doing. This is roughly how we're planning on doing it, and here's our open questions and our approach to figuring this out.
And Roger, if I could just make one more recommendation before I pass to you, I would also recommend like formally deciding what the graduation process is going to be, and just celebrate those stages so that you can tell people like we've officially caught all the bugs. Now is a good time to start testing it in lower environments, and that it should be your like carrot to get people involved. Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, it was mostly that last point of just double checking. This is a proposal to get the next release will have this as a flag, and then as Yusuf said about making sure that each step along the way is then handled. That's it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable, and we can look into that community kind of thing. Devin, even here, a community members just said, "How can I sign up for that?" We'll figure something out. My initial thought is we're in the CNCF Slack, so I can just make a Slack channel and get people in there. We'll see what we can do. I don't think I can ping at channel and at here though, so we can talk about some ideas as maintainers. Okay, so that is one of the potential items for 111. I would really like to try and get the ball rolling on it, so we can estimate how long it's going to be. The other large item is that we have the provider working group ongoing right now, and we've already cut some code and proof of concepts around this, and that is another feature that we could be adding to 1.12. The downside of that is I think the people who would work on the engine would be similar to the people who work on the new provider protocol, just down to skill sets of code. So it may be a timing issue, but we can figure that one out. Yeah, and then go ahead, Yusuf.
If you are interested in feedback on like how many concurrent experiments to run, I would highly recommend like the lowest number you allow.
Yes.
You will not get feedback if you have like 5 experiments running concurrently, at least not useful. And you will not know what the interaction of the different experiments are unless you go crazy with your testing.
Okay. So maybe what I need to be doing as the maintainer here, or asking the maintainers to do, is to come to the TSC with a proposal for each of these features, and we can discuss prioritization and scope for a release. And I can take that action to do for the next TSC meeting. That's fine. Other than that, I don't have any other 1.12 feature sets items that are on the radar. There are some large issues that have been upvoted by the community. If we go and have a look at our top ranking issues, just to talk about this one openly, because I've had some comments privately about why these aren't being addressed. So ephemeral values is being addressed in 1.10. Introducing or implement the stack concept. This is a very big picture conversation that is ongoing. We plan on writing up a lot of documents. There's also this overlaps with breaking down the teralith or something like that. The word teralith gets thrown around a lot on LinkedIn lately, so this is in people's minds.
It's number 10.
It's number 10 in this list, so it's in the list twice. This is definitely being discussed. We're trying to come up with plans about what we can do. The difficult part is breaking up that plan of a very big picture of what is our ideal way to deal with this, breaking it down, and then also looking at how we can make sure that we're interacting with all of the tacoses, so everything that automates OpenTofu, and how we also maybe fit into the TerraGrunt infrastructure that also has stacks. Maybe there's some overlap, maybe there's replacement. I don't know. We need to figure that one out. This one is happening in 1.10. Skip refreshing. I think that's being discussed.
Wait, you said in 1.10?
1.11, sorry.
That one is not.
No? Oh,
No.
maybe we're still discussing it. I'm getting it mixed up with something else. Oh, I am, yes.
Yeah.
Linting is a story that's been coming up now and again, especially around the fact that TF-Lint has said over a year ago now, I believe, that they're not supporting OpenTofu. Their reasoning for doing that is that they copy and paste vendor in Terraform code. Maybe there's a politics game. We need to reach out to TF-Lint. Maybe we need to implement our own linting. I'd rather not. But it's something we should be discussing. It's a possibility for 1.12 or 1.13. And there's a couple others in here that are still being discussed. I don't think we're doing anything about CDKTF.
Can you add an action item for me to close that out? Because we discussed this in the TSC. We made clear what our commitment is. I just need to close that out. That's been on the list for the better part of a year.
Okay.
I apologize for not getting to that.
Yeah. Devin, I hope you've just said, hey, that's my issue. I hope that you weren't on about the CDK one. I don't think you were, which is great.
He said the linting.
The linting one. Yeah, the linting one's been up there a while now, so it needs to be done. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is backends as plugins. So, HashiCorp has been slowly adding something to their provider protocol called Pluggable State Store, PSS, which looks like a way to do backends as plugins. And so we are waiting to see what gets added to the Terraform provider protocol before we make any full decisions on what we do, in case we go in a different direction. However, we've also been discussing doing a granular state store. So this is the idea of storing things a lot more granularly instead of one big JSON blob somewhere. And we think that HashiCorp doesn't want to go in that direction. It looks like their pluggable state storage is just a way to get state, put state, lock it and unlock it. And so we want to be putting this on hold until we know what HashiCorp has planned. And then we design our feature set on top of that. So that's just, I wanted to talk about this publicly because some people have been asking me, why aren't we just picking items off the top of this list for 1.12? So I think that covers all the 1.12 possibilities. Please bear them all in mind. I will try and collate a list for the next TSC meeting about the big two experiments, and we can discuss in the next meeting about 1.12 and what we should prioritize. Does anyone have any strong feeling on linting, by the way? Because I've seen it pop up in conversations a lot in the last 2 weeks. Yusuf, and then Lawrence.
I can share that TerraGrunt has a pin dependency on TF-Lint because at some point it was decided it was a good idea to bake in TF-Lint as a hook that's pre-built in TerraGrunt. And we've had to pin back the version of TF-Lint to avoid adopting the BSL version. And in that, there's been public discussion of like dropping the TF-Lint hook altogether as a consequence. Because like, why are we staying pinned on an outdated version of this tool? So that might be like, motivation for an open source alternative to pop up. But for our users, it's been, convenient for like a very small minority to always have linting involved in their TerraGrunt workflows. And for others, it's been completely irrelevant.
Okay. It's a shame you've had to pin your version. And I know you may not want to answer this publicly, so please tell me you don't want to answer. That's fine. Has Gruntworks tried to talk to TF-Lint privately and solve any of this? I'm just curious if OpenTofu should try and do this. Like I can try and talk to the TF-Lint people and say, hey, if we can give you a library, would you not vendor Terraform code?
As far as I can recall, we have not. I just looked through some public issues on the like discussions, and as far as I'm aware, they have not made a decision one way or the other. Or rather, they've firmly decided that they're going to use Terraform code, and that they're happy with their what's it called, pinned usage of or rather their usage of DSL content in their repo.
That's a shame. Okay.
Can't really do too much digging into it. That's unfortunately.
Yeah. It's the best you can do. Larry.
As I recall, there was at least one anecdotal piece of evidence that I have from Slack where someone was mentioning their company's adoption of OpenTofu was predicated on the existence of a linting tool. And given that that was Slack, I'd imagine that there's probably more people who haven't communicated to the community at large that have the same thought process on adopting OpenTofu only if there's a linting tool.
That's valid. And then, RL, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm very sorry. I know that M0 has an upcoming static analysis tool. Would that help this situation, or is that completely separate?
I'll need to check, but I'm guessing it would, but we'll need to validate that.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, we can continue the conversation on GitHub and out of place, but it's something that I definitely think it's a story that we should be answering as OpenTofu one day. As Devin's just said in the chat, they have that hesitance around TF-Lint, and a few other people do. I've found for 95% of users who aren't using OpenTofu features, TF-Lint is perfectly fine. But it's the moment you start using things that are tofu specific that it breaks. In fact, I think it doesn't even work with newer versions of Terraform on some things. I'm sure they haven't added action block support, things like that right now. So, yeah. Yusuf.
Well, this might be related. I know that Dio's working on some Dependabot-based functionality that's broken because you need to leverage a special parser in order to be able to parse OpenTofu configurations. And I believe he's working on getting Dependabot to adopt that. Is it possible that additional plumbing exposed by OpenTofu could make it easier for new linters to pop up to make it simple to lint OpenTofu configurations?
So we've had this conversation as maintainers quite a few times about the idea of like, do we expose part of OpenTofu to as a library so that we can allow other people to consume this? And I'm just talking generically. Christian, I'm not talking about your experiment of the parsing of configuration into a generic object. And the conversation of libraries comes up a lot. Can I have a library to do X? Can I have a library to parse all the configuration, etc.? We can go and give it. We can do it. What we've found with the code base that we've inherited is that it's very tightly coupled to everything else. And we could go out there and give a library. I assume it would be the same as what TF-Lint is consuming, right? They've just copied and pasted the code instead of depending on a library. The downside is that everyone always comes up with, which is, how do we deal with versioning? How do we deal with compatibility? How do we say that this shouldn't be used for production use? And it's all about delivering libraries that becomes a problem rather than actually writing the libraries. My personal opinion, and I've said this before, and I think Larry, you even pushed back. I was like, your first time. It was my personal opinion is that everything in the internal package should just be made external, and if people want to use it, people want to use it. And we put in a piece of documentation that says this is not intended for usage, but please talk to the OpenTofu team before you do. But that's not the right way of doing things. But maybe doing things the right way is harming OpenTofu when it comes to this, when it comes to libraries. Why can't we ship a libraries for people? Now we are looking at making some things pulled out to libraries. So provider execution, we've been looking at pulling out to an external library. Maybe we can pull out things like configuration parsing and other stuff for new packages. But it won't give someone access to the existing code base unless we write a thin layer on top or underneath. The joy of software, right? Does anyone else have an opinion on this? I know, Larry, you really want to keep things. Version it and do it properly.
I do have an opinion. Yes, I do. So if we did, like, for instance, take the config package and make it decoupled and made it public in a way that, okay, OpenTofu is one consumer of it, and a linting package can also be a consumer of this config package in some way, that'd be cool. But I don't like being wishy-washy about it and saying, oh yeah, we have this OpenTofu internal, etc., and actually it's external and everything is available to be used for whatever. That that creates external dependencies that we don't know about, that aren't explicitly made into a contract, that are it becomes wild. We don't know what we can and cannot change in terms of the API, and that's a scary place to be, especially when you're trying to make big changes, like, for example, the new engine proposal.
I would also say, considering the usefulness to third parties, like saying it's all includable or all importable because it's not in internal is not the same as we've formally taken this library and made it versioned and publicly accessible and independently tested, so you can rely on the stability of this library for this purpose, as opposed to, you know, go read the code and figure out if it does what you want it to do. So there's also a benefit to the end user in addition to benefits to the maintainers, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
Just given the recent conversations on extending the provider API, are there other kind of places where this hook in, your additional hooks somewhere into the code base that maybe additional APIs into, as opposed to actually just exposing everything as a library?
I think people
you run this similar problem, but
yeah, I think people want configuration parsing so that they can get access to what's going on with this.
Sure.
Some people also want state querying in a certain way. I think a lot of the tacos companies have asked me for like a way to go and have a library to query the state files instead of we're all maintaining our own. I'm sure that Terragrunt could maybe use something about provider and module installation. I'm sure that it could use something around all of the different functions that we have built into Terraform. I think that's been asked for in the past.
I think that's a good place to start. Could we like set up an issue where we externalize the config package, for example? I think that is completely reasonable. It's something that would enable linting. It would enable a lot of tooling.
The problem is the interdependencies. So if you externalize the config package, you have to be able to use it, you've got to go and have every other package as well. The Tofu language server would benefit on having some of that as well. We're actively putting work into a Tofu language server as well.
It might throw us off, like further off course on this meeting, but just sharing, I learned today that there's no way to do non-interactive migration of state, like tofu init migrate state. Like, seems like I would know that by now, but turns out that's just impossible. You just got to pipe in yes to init migrate state, which kind of sucks. So a little bit that's like that would be nice to, address if OpenTofu decides that's actually a great design decision and we should keep it non-interactive in the OpenTofu CLI. Yeah.
That feels like a bug. Can you open just a small issue for that use of like?
Great.
we should be able to support a lot of things non-interactively. Maybe there's some reasoning behind it we can discuss. So, yeah.
So, from a developer's perspective, I think that most of the core team is, old terminology. Most of the maintainers are on board with breaking stuff out into libraries to some degree. I think the big question, and this is kind of why we keep kicking it back to the TSC, is how do we prioritize that compared to everything else that we have on our plates? How does that fit into the story of building features for O12? And yeah, it's some things are easier than others, but there's so much of this application was never designed to be broken out into its own libraries, and there's so many different asks that it's hard to kind of nail down what the biggest bang for the buck was if this were to be prioritized.
So there is something that we can solve here, actually, though, looking forward. State encryption is something that we did recently, and we did design that with the idea that the package could go public one day if we wanted it to. Christian shaking his head. No one wants it, which I think is right. But is there any reason, say, for the engine experimentation that Martin Atkins is doing right now, and for the new features, that everything that we write going forward could be made into public packages?
I don't see how that solves the issue, because that's not.
What if someone else wants to use this package? No, I'm just saying, like, as a generic rule, like, should we try and make sure that any packages that we're writing can be made public?
Then I think depending on how we slice it, that could triple the amount of time it takes to implement something like what Martin's talking about. I'm pulling a number out of my ass, to be clear, but
let's discuss it as maintainers, maybe.
Okay.
About the feasibility, and we can talk about it. I think it's a technical problem, though.
It's a technical problem and a question of prioritization.
Yeah. Well, with 20 minutes left, does anyone mind if I move on to HashiConf opinions with search and actions? No. So, as I'm sure we're all aware, HashiConf happened last week, and Terraform announced, I would say, 2 big features. The rest were tiny things here and there, like hold your own key and things like this. But 2 big ones that people may be starting to ask us for are Terraform Search and Terraform Actions. So Terraform Search solves the problem of bringing in unmanaged resources into your state via the provider, and Terraform Actions looks like a nice way to invoke lambdas and Ansible playbooks. So I think they both have valid use cases, and that's the reason I spoke to you about the use cases rather than how they solved it. I think we should, as the maintainers, should spend a little bit of time discussing what our options are for those use cases and those stories. I think when I spoke to you guys 6 weeks ago, I think I was saying if HashiCorp is implementing features, we should look at what they add to the provider protocol and try and design our developer experience around that within Tofu. And I think Terraform Search is a perfect example of this, where right now Terraform search, you have to create a tfquery.hcl file, then run Terraform search, which will then create you some import blocks that you then run Terraform import on. And then you can generate code about these at each stage and bring that into your infrastructure as code. And I think the flow is personally designed a lot around HTTP Terraform. And I would like to spend some time with the maintainers looking at how can we just solve the story of we have a provider that allows us to search for resources, and we have a user story of I want to bring in unmanaged resources into state. How can OpenTofu solve that rather than just implementing the tfquery.hcl file and everything that HashiCorp did? Does anyone have any strong opinions any way around search or actions, or should the maintainers just go and investigate and see what we can come up with?
The latter.
Just a heads up, like, go ahead, sorry, Roger.
Just the channel. I can't remember who used to be the broken record in this, but can that result in an RFC if it's a wildly different approach?
Yeah, we should probably write up some RFCs about this. Actions, I think, overlaps with some of my idea around middleware, especially the idea that in Terraform actions, you can invoke an action as a life cycle, like post, create, read, update, and destroy of resources. That feels a little bit similar to my middleware, so we should maybe discuss how they tie in, where the overlap is, if we can hook into the provider functionality. But yeah, I think we should write RFCs for these.
I think, well, for search, it seems to rely on the 112 identities they've added, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is not something we're doing, or are we?
No, but they're easy enough to add. So they are a way for a provider to say, if I've got a resource identity, you can import it. I think the way it was designed is that you can pass it an AWS ARN, but I don't think it ended up being implemented that way. I need to go and look at it. I've never really used it. So yeah, it's all built on top of resource identities and the concept that one resource in your cloud gets one identity, and it's a known ID that never clashes with anything else. We should probably at least, I think actually we accepted an issue last week to allow for import from resource identity. So I think it's, I don't think we put it on a milestone, but maybe we should put it on the 1.11, the 1.12, sorry, milestone. So yeah. Well, does anyone have anything else they'd like to ad hoc add to the agenda? No? If not, I think we can call it there. I'd like to ask TSC members to stay behind for a couple minutes at the end to discuss something. Otherwise, we're done.
We're going to hop into a separate call. Sorry.
We're going to hop into a separate call. Christian, can you send us all a link to that call?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Take care, everybody.
Cheers.
Thanks all.
Bye.